Being anti-Israel, my brother's like, they're going to kill you. They're going to throw you in jail. There's going to be some smear campaign. I got death threats. I got blackmail. Anybody that's against their narrative gets f***ed up. You can talk about Muslims, and that's like a quarter of the globe. So you get distracted from who's actually causing the real problems, Jewish supremacy. And that's where we're at.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
I am a Reva, and I was taught how to pray Salah.
That means every single time I pray,
the person who told me gets the reward.
5 times a day, from Fajr to Isha.
If you want to support someone like me in learning Salah,
then sponsor 10 people for just £100.
Remember the Prophet, peace be upon him, said,
Charity does not decrease wealth. Click the button and donate now.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. I came across a gem of a podcast hosted by a guy named Bradley Martyn featuring Dan Bilzerian, covering the topic of the Israeli regime. Dan left no stone unturned, as he not only delved deep into Israel's dark history of corruption as well as their current genocide, ethnic cleansing and occupation of Palestine. He also completely exposed the disturbing mafia-style chokehold they have on global industries and politics, along with the dangerous, extremist and toxic ideology they follow. This information is essential to share at the moment, as the Israeli online propaganda is in full swing to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, with swarms of unethical Zionist influencers and disgusting far-right media platforms peddling the Israeli government's genocidal misinformation with the aim of normalizing and justifying their evil actions. Let's take a look at the first clip.
I'm an ex-Navy vet. I had been researching this stuff, looking into Israel more, and I saw like the USS Liberty. I don't know if you...
I've seen this. I've looked into some of the stuff. I don't know all the details of it.
Israel was at war, and they wanted to drag the U.S. into the war with them. So they attacked one of our Navy ships. I mean, it wasn't just like a regular attack. They were like napalming the decks, blowing up the life rafts. They torpedoed the ship. I mean, they just, went at the ship for like an hour and a half. And we had called in SOS calls. We're supposedly their ally. They wanted to sink the ship, and they wanted to blame it on the people they were fighting, false flag attacks. And then we would go and fight the people that, they're at war with. And they did the same thing with the Levant affair. And, I think they did the same exact thing with 9/11. So they've got a history of these false flag attacks. And when I read about the USS Liberty, that one kind of hit home because they put a gag order on these people. They killed all these, U.S. Navy guys. I'm just like, how the f are we allies of the country that's attacked us multiple times, stolen our secrets? As you start to learn more and more, it's all bad. There's no good. They've done nothing for us ever. And we just constantly send them money. We've given them between 20 and 30 trillion dollars. So it's almost like our entire national deficit is our support of Israel. October 7th happened, and I think people started looking at Israel more. And then when they pushed them into refugee camps and they bombed the refugee camp, it was, to me, a complete one-sided genocide. This wasn't a war. The people don't have guns. You got a small resistance organization, and you're just bombing more than 50% civilian infrastructures. You're cutting off water. You're cutting off electricity. To me, it's just, it's war crimes, and we're funding it.
Most people in the creator space or just in media in general are somewhat, it feels taboo to talk about these things. People are afraid. And I think in some cases, rightfully so. It makes me question, why would it be such a taboo thing to talk about if it wasn't a problem?
Exactly. That's the whole thing. You can talk about Muslims. You can say whatever you want. And that's like a quarter of the globe. Why can you say whatever you want about these people, these people, these people? The moment you say something about, they're just such a protected class. And then I started looking at it why are they so protected? Obviously, Jews died in World War II, but you're talking about a war where 80 million people died. Prior to that, the Bolshevik Revolution was 84% Jewish, and they mass murdered Christians. And nobody talks about that. They killed 30 million Christians, right, just during that alone. Why don't they talk about that genocide? And those are the people we side with. Look, I'm Armenian. They killed half my people, and Israel, denies that genocide. But yet, if you even question their genocide, quote unquote, in Germany, you'll go to jail. And this started becoming more apparent with what's going on in Israel. They said people were, made into lampshades and soap, and they acknowledged that was all lies. And then you look at what Israel said for October 7th: beheaded babies, babies in ovens. They come up with all this stuff that sounds really horrific, and it was all bullshit. Mass rapes, all this stuff was all bullshit. And then so you start seeing it's these people have such a pattern of lying, and then you look at the media's lied to us.
It's understandable that Dan, as an ex-US Navy serviceman, takes the numerous Israeli false flag attacks on American soil, sea and airspace very personally. He blamed Israel for some of the biggest acts of extremism carried out against America, which he claimed the Israelis tried to pin on rival nations with the hidden motive of roping the US into fighting wars on Israel's behalf. As Dan said, Israel has a documented history of doing such things, and this is a pattern that continues to this very day, as we have all been witnessing for the last 2 years in Gaza and the West Bank, where the Zionist entity have bombed refugee camps and civilian infrastructure, while starving and dehydrating innocent people, including children, by denying food and aid from other countries to enter Palestine. Dan was correct to question what kind of ally brutally attacks and kills a friendly nation's military, steals their nuclear secrets, blackmails their politicians, and drains some of the majority of the taxes their citizens pay, causing massive debt deficits. Bradley Martyn seemed to know the basics about what's going on. I mean, how could you not, with all the damning evidence of Israeli war crimes that we see on social media on a daily basis? Brad was correct to be suspicious of why so many people are intimidated to speak up against Israel due to the risk of censorship and severe repercussions. And as Dan said, this goes hand in hand with the intentional rise of anti-Muslim propaganda we see online, which has been amped up and pumped out at a rapid rate in order to dehumanize the Palestinians to justify their extermination. Dan claimed that the Israeli regime have weaponized the genocide of Jewish people during World War II to ironically commit a genocide of Gazans in the modern era. Dan also made the claim that not only do they use what happened during World War II to minimize and deny the Gaza genocide, they do the same thing when denying the Bolshevik and Armenian genocides, which they were also responsible for. Additionally, as Dan pointed out, many of the accusations the Israeli regime made about the attack on October 7th, 2023 turned out to be outright lies, which they still repeat to this very day. Let's watch the next clip.
The most like common things that people will like point to is like, well, oh, Jewish people are in control of this industry or that industry or whatever it is, right? So all these things are happening because they're in, they're the CEOs or the owners of the pharmaceutical industries. They're the CEOs or the owners of these like giant, military industrial complex.
This is something that I've rattled around with a lot of times. Is like, is it just because they have power and power corrupts and people are selfish? And so, when they have these positions, then they do up. And it's like, I think that's a part of it, but I don't think that's all of it. So it's a problem with their religion. When you have a religion that teaches you that you're better than other people, when you have a religion that teaches you that you can steal from other people, that you can lie to other people that aren't Jewish, and you have two sets of rules, then you obviously are going to have, every excuse to be self-serving. You're gonna have every excuse to be selfish. Look at these bat mitzvahs. They like teach the kids like you're better than everybody else. Like that is a reoccurring theme in their religion. The problem with that is, you can start dehumanizing people. When you dehumanize people, you can rationalize genocide. You can rationalize stealing. They're stealing land in the West Bank. They're doing all this stuff. And I think it's a religious problem.
It's hard for me to fully agree with that point that it's religion based, because even in these other religions, people do shady
100%, but the religion doesn't teach them they're better than other people. Christianity wants other people to be Christian. Muslims want other people to be Christian or Muslim. They say, hey, we believe this is the religion of God. We want everybody to follow it. We think this is the right path. They have their principles. They've got their teachings. And obviously, there's going to be flaws in religions, but Judaism doesn't try and convert anybody. They just think they're better. They just think that we are the chosen ones. And basically, everybody's here to serve us. And so when you have that mentality, look at how they're treating the Palestinians. They're treating them like cattle. And so you're going to obviously treat cattle differently than you're going to treat a human. So when your belief system is such that you are better than everybody else and other people are subhuman, then, you're going to have exactly what's going on in Israel. I think they have so much power now that they got arrogant. If they were smart, they would have just, when they saw how much negative pushback there was, with this genocide they're committing, they would just stop and been like, okay, this is enough. This is an appropriate response. But they didn't. They just kept going, and they kept forcing our U.S. politicians to fund this and to support this and to fund it and to support it. And I think that's what really opened people's eyes. BlackRock's all Jewish. All the top execs are all Jewish. They want diversity so bad. Why don't they have diversity? There's no, let's, bring in the black Christian guy. No, there's none of that. You would get ostracized. They keep their people all Jewish. So it's rules for me and not for thee. So what they're telling people, what they're pushing is not what they're doing in their own country. Porn is illegal in Israel, but yet all porn sites are all owned by Jewish people. You look at who owns it, you look at who's pushing it, and then you look at if they do it in their own country, and it's completely fucking opposite. They push DEI, right? But not for themselves, right? They push open borders, but not for Israel. They push gender mix, or race mixing, but not for them. You know what I'm saying? So it's if you're a hypocrite, I have issue with it.
Both Brad and Dan claimed that Jewish Zionists control major global industries, such as finance, pharmaceuticals, the military-industrial complex, the mainstream media, pornography, and the entertainment industry. Brad made the case that maybe power has corrupted these groups and individuals that misuse their influence in favour of Israel. Dan acknowledged that this may be somewhat true, but was also of the opinion that their corruption and oppression had a religious motive, citing Judaism as another reason for their behaviour. Unlike the anti-Islam Zionist propaganda channels and platforms, I'm not going to lower myself to co-signing on religious discourse. discrimination, especially due to the fact that I've had pro-Palestinian Jewish guests and rabbis on my channel who do practice Judaism and that are very dedicated in their activism for Palestine. I think that people Dan Bilzerian is speaking about that interpret Judaism in a way that translates into Jewish supremacy are not religious people. Netanyahu and his cabinet are clearly not men of God. And although the majority of the Jewish Israeli public support their government's genocidal actions, most of them are either atheists or religious fanatics that would happily weaponize Judaism in order to justify war crimes. Additionally, the majority of Israel's disgusting paid Zionist propagandists are a mix of Jews, atheists, Christians, Hindus, and even some Muslims that worship money as their god. I haven't looked into the religion of Judaism extensively, so I'm unable to substantiate Dan's claims about his followers being permitted to lie, steal, oppress, and exert superiority over non-Jews. If that is true, it's definitely worrying. I have, however, seen examples of Jewish kids being radicalized from a very young age, as Dan claimed, both in Europe and Israel. There was a recent incident where a group of 50 French Jewish teenagers were removed from a flight in Spain by the police for disruptive behaviour where they chanted death to Arabs. And if you take a quick look online, you'll see numerous examples of Israeli youngsters hurling abuse and even assaulting Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, and Christians. Dan was spot on when he said that the dehumanization of Palestinians is how the majority of Israelis rationalise the genocide in Gaza and the occupation of the West Bank. Again, I would put this down to Zionist ideology or Israeli culture rather than the religion of Judaism, because I don't think any religious person would tolerate such evil. Bradley had a similar opinion to me. However, Dan made an interesting point when he countered by saying that Islam and Christianity are universal religions that are open to anyone to join, regardless of their background, whereas Judaism is not. Dan also made the claim that Israel promotes racial diversity, pornography, and open borders in other countries, but not in Israel. I agree with Dan on the point that the Israeli government is drunk off power due to a lack of consequences for their actions throughout history, which has resulted in them becoming excessively arrogant and delusional to the point where they're openly exploiting US politicians in order to commit atrocities, which has exposed their previously hidden sinister agenda to the world. Let's watch the next clip.
Do you think all Jewish people are
Absolutely not. No.
Yeah.
And you have to understand, like, I came from a place where, like, I had more Jewish friends than non-Jewish friends because I'm a rich guy, hang out with rich guys. Rich guys happen to be Jewish. I went from there to being like, these people are causing 90% of the world's problems and they're less than a fifth of a percent of the population. What the f is going on? And the moment I started taking the stance, I got death threats, I got blackmailed, I got this, I got that, there's a lot of but that just made me more convinced that I was doing the right thing,
I keep going back to the idea that if it was another group of people, would it not just end up being the same? I really
that's a good point. And like I said, I've thought about that, but I truly think that it is a religious problem of supremacy. Supremacy is not good. I think the religion is like satanic. Like, and if you look at what they actually tell you in there, like things that they teach in the Talmud are literally like completely up. Like, it is okay to have sex with a 3-year-old. Word for word translation. Like, I've got full like breakdowns. I'm not like talking out of my, I've fact checked this 100%. They believe that Jesus is burning in hell and human, like Virgin Mary's a whore. Like, there's like atrocious shit in there. It literally says in the Talmud, like, if a Gentile reads this, you should kill him. In their Talmud, there's 8 different genders. There's not 8 genders in the Christian, there's not 8 genders in the Quran. And here's what happens is the Jewish media pushes the left their talking points. And now it's a left versus the right. And the right looks at it like, oh, the problem is the left. And the left looks at it like, oh, the problem is white supremacy, because that's what CNN said. And the problem is Muslims. And so you get distracted from who's actually causing the real problems, Jewish supremacy. That is where the problems are coming from. It's like everybody's fighting with each other, and it's a lot easier to rule people when they're at odds. And so I think this is like the one unifying issue that actually could, bring people together. Be like, man, like the people that are us over is a small group. Being anti-Israel, I thought this was going to be like the end of me. I really did.
You just didn't care.
Just felt like it was the right thing, man. Because there was like months before that when I wanted to say something, but I was scared to say it.
Yeah.
Because my brother's like, they're going to kill you. Like, all these people are like, they're going to kill you. They're going to throw you in jail. There's going to be some smear campaign. Like, anybody that's kind of like against their narrative gets f***ed up.
Yeah.
I feel like I get sniped by a Mossad agent tomorrow.
Is that a real fear?
I think it's a real possibility. I'm not afraid of it. Look at all the people that have gone against Israel, all the people that are in positions of power that question it. Shawl of Iran, Saddam Hussein, Nixon, JFK, Gaddafi, like literally they killed all of them. You know what I mean? Like almost all of them, or they completely ruined them or, removed them from power. Like, it was not a small thing. Malcolm X was talking out about, Israel. Michael Jackson was like, you look at the fate of all these people and it's like, it has to be a real concern. And they're willing to kill people. I mean, they're killing, tens of thousands of children and doing it without remorse too. Like, they're running around, like, mocking these people that they're killing. They're putting on like the women's clothes that they killed. They're like, posing over a baby that died from starvation with a donut and smiling. Like, it's like really sadistic.
I'm glad that Dan Bilzerian specified that he doesn't think all Jewish people are Zionists or pro-Israel, which for me proves that he's not anti-Semitic, along with the fact that his former friend group was predominantly Jewish, all of whom are no longer friends with Dan, due to him calling out Israel for their war crimes. But who needs Zionists as friends anyway? Let's not shy away from the fact that a large number of Jewish people are pro-Israel Zionists, which as Dan said is problematic. And let's not fall into the trap of marginalising all Jewish people as being the same, because as I said before, there are some non-Zionist Jews, and even a minority of non-Zionist Israelis who have protested in their own country for the freedom of Palestinians. I'm not surprised that Dan Bilzerian has been blackmailed and has received death threats for being so vocal in his support for Palestine. It's understandable that his family are concerned for his safety and that he's paranoid about being falsely imprisoned, defamed, or even assassinated by Mossad. As he said, being a high-profile celebrity or politician does not mean someone is immune from being taken out or having their reputation destroyed by the Israeli government, as history has proven over and over again. And as Dan said, it's not just in the past. In the present day, we also see sadistic examples of the idea of killing and starving women and children whilst mocking them on camera. I agree with Dan on his point that any type of supremacy is wrong, whether that be Jewish supremacy or white supremacy or whatever. And he was right to call out the Western media's complicity in promoting this ideology by pitting people against each other with the sole aim of benefiting Israel. As he correctly stated, Islamophobia is the #1 example of this. He also made the point that Judaism is satanic. As a Muslim, I can't say I agree with this, because in Islam we're told that Judaism in its original form, as in the Torah, is a revelation from God. However, it was alarming to hear Dan list off things in the Talmud that promote child abuse, gender confusion, the disrespect of Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, and his mother Maryam, may Allah be pleased with her, as well as violence towards non-Jews. Dan claimed that global opposition to the criminal Israeli regime could be a uniting factor for humanity. However, I think that's wishful thinking, as there are millions of money-hungry shills and sellouts with lucrative monetary incentives to push Israeli propaganda in order to brainwash the masses. Let's watch the last clip.
I don't think Americans really think about it like that. Palestine is kind of like if Mexico were to like come in and invade Texas, and then we were to create a resistance organization to try and get our state back. Like those people would be our heroes. They wouldn't be terrorists. They'd be taking back our own land. They're fighting back, to get out of apartheid. They're fighting back because their brothers and sisters have been killed, and they're cutting off water, and they're cutting off electricity, and they're starving these people and committing war crimes. I mean, like there's so many examples. They're literally stealing people's homes in the West Bank. And this is like completely like on the other side where Hamas is. It has nothing to do with Hamas. This is like absolutely unequivocal war crimes. They're not allowed to steal land. They're like bulldozing people's houses. They're setting the trees on fire. Hind Rajab, this is like a 6-year-old girl. She's in a car with her parents and her 9-year-old sister. And, their parents aren't terrorists. They're a husband and a wife and 2 little girls. And this tank starts open firing on them, and the sister, the 9-year-old, calls up and they're like, they're shooting, my parents are dead. She's crying. The little sister's crying. She's like, please send help. They send out 2 paramedics. The tank shoots the paramedics, literally kills the paramedics trying to save them, then shoots the 9-year-old. Then the 6-year-old gets on the phone. She's like, I'm the only one, in the car. Everybody's dead. Like, please help me, please help me, please help me. She's on the phone for 20 minutes. And then they finally kill her too. And this is a 6-year-old girl. They shot 370 rounds into this civilian car from a tank. And we're like, and when we demanded that they look into this, they're like, oh, we investigated and we ruled that there was no fault. Just recently, there was a U.S. citizen that was over there protesting. An Israeli sniper shot her in the head. She was completely unharmed. And Randy Fine, senator or congressman or whatever in the state of Florida, tweeted out, kill him, around, find out, basically celebrating the death of a U.S. citizen. That's the problem, is they have more allegiance to Israel than they do America. Every single one of them. And they're all dual citizens of Israel and America. And they're representing us in Congress. They're in our government, and they're putting their country ahead of our own country. And that's treason. And that's where we're at. I'm not Muslim. I have no reason, I have no hidden agenda here. These are just the facts that I'm uncovering. And when you find that out, you can draw no other conclusion other than America's occupied. Our country is being controlled by Israel to our own detriment. And it's, it's a fucked up situation. If we don't do something about it, I think it's going to be the undoing of our country and possibly the world. Israel's in a spot right now where if Netanyahu stops the war, he goes to jail. So we've got this genocidal maniac that absolutely has to continue this genocide. And our country is just going to go along with it no matter what. I mean, Trump is going to back him. Biden backed him. And eventually, if he keeps invading Lebanon with Iran, eventually he's going to lead to World War III. Almost every single person we've gone to war with just happens to be an enemy of Israel. Iraq, Afghanistan, it's all these places, all of it benefits Israel. What Israel did was way more up. And if you look at the interviews of these people, what happened during Nakba, and the fact that they put these people in cages, they raped, underage girls, they just shot people. I mean, there's this one legitimate account of this guy who's the man next to me, they put a gun to his head and they say, if you don't throw your baby in that bakery oven, we're going to kill you. The guy wouldn't do it. They hit him in the head, threw his baby in the oven, made him watch the baby burn alive, and then threw him in the oven after they'd watched. So all the things that they've accused the Palestinians of, these mother have all done themselves. Like, that's how they come up with it. They accuse everybody else of doing the things that they do. That's what's crazy. What is going on in Gaza right now? You have one side that has literally the best military grade weapons in the entire world, and Air Force, artillery.
I'm not even debating
nukes,
that, by the way.
And these are like unarmed civilians.
I like the analogy Dan used to make Palestinians' struggle more relatable for Americans, where he gave the hypothetical example of Mexico invading and occupying the US and creating apartheid conditions, like Israel has done to the Palestinians. Credit to Dan for remembering Hind Rajab, a 6-year-old child who was brutally executed by the IDF along with her 9-year-old sister, their family, and the paramedics who tried to save them, all of whom were non-combatants. As he said, despite this one incident, out of tens of thousands similar to it, being so highly publicised, the Israeli regime just brushed it under the carpet with zero accountability. Dan also gave real-life examples of how the IDF have raped underage girls and burned babies alive, which they projected onto and falsely accused the Palestinians of doing with no evidence whatsoever. Dan further exposed the ugly truth about Israel's war crimes not being limited to just Palestinians, when he cited an example of American female activists being killed by an IDF sniper. And instead of the death of a US citizen by a foreign nation being condemned, it was cheered on by Zionist American politicians like Randy Fine, who is the definition of a Jewish supremacist extremist. As Dan said, these treacherous US politicians are demonic pariahs that are destroying their own country from within due to their loyalty being with Israel over America. As Dan stated, the US is controlled by Israel to the detriment of the American people. The same can be said about the majority of Western nations. The crazy part is that this adversely affects the citizens of these Western nations, yet still some of these citizens are brainwashed into supporting Israel due to their well-funded far-right Zionist propaganda machine. I agree with Dan that the only way we can put an end to all of this mess is by somehow stopping Israeli Prime Minister and wanted war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, which the US President Donald Trump seems too cowardly to do, just like his predecessor was. So until an international effort is made in Europe, America and the global south to recognise a Palestinian state and to intervene through military action against Israel, all of which is now being discussed, nothing will change. And if this doesn't happen ASAP, Israel will continue to conduct invasion after invasion and war after war, just like they've done time after time, from when they first colonised Palestine, as Dan said. Dan Bilzerian has no reason to put his neck on the line like this by exposing Israel, other than it's the right thing to do, and I respect that. I think we should be inspired by people like him to exhibit the same type of bravery, despite the odds being completely against us and no matter how hopeless the situation may seem. Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my free Telegram group via the link in the description, and remember to like, subscribe and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.